everyone. A very good afternoon to one and all. Welcome to our virtual conference. Payment Councils of India and Lyra presents Digital Money 2020 powered by Fintech. Let us start a panel discussion on tokenization, the go-ahead model for Indian payment system. I will start by introducing our moderator for the session, Ms. Geetika Raheja, Director, Payments Transformation, PwC. Welcome, ma'am.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you, ma'am. Now, welcoming our panelists for the session, Mr. Pramod Mulani, Senior Director and Head Digital Innovation, Partnerships and Fintech, Visa. Ms. Gunjan Pradhan, Payments Head, India, Netflix. Mr. Nalin Bansal, Head, Rupay, NCMC and NFS, NPCI. Mr. Vijin Venugopalan, Head of Tokenization, South Asia and Southeast Asia, Mastercard. Welcome all.
Hello, everyone.
Before I can request Ms. Raheja to kindly take this forward, I'm requesting all the attendees to kindly put their questions in the chat box, and the panel will address a selected few at the end of the session. Over to you, ma'am.
Thanks. So I think through the sessions that most people would have attended, everyone would have heard about the digital payment story that India is going through right now, right? And I think anyone who's following the story would agree that India is firing essentially on all cylinders right now. I think two trends which are relevant to our topic today is the growth in the mobile payments and the merchant side of the story, and also the entire credit card growth, which I think has come as a bit of a surprise to a lot of people in the last couple of years. The tremendous growth that we see on the card side, mostly on the credit side. So I think these two trends, as well as the fact that we have an active regulator who's kept everyone on their toes for the last few years, I think all of this lends itself very well to this topic, our topic for today, which is around tokenization. So last year, RBI essentially came up with the regulation to allow card tokenization in the country, and essentially, I think the essence of tokenization comes from the security point of view, but there is this whole aspect around customer convenience and customer experience that gets enhanced along with it, right? Which is something I think we in India need to start discovering a little more. And I think some of these things are topics that I'm looking forward to discuss with the panel today. So let's hear it from the panel what they think about this whole tokenization story in India. So maybe starting with Nalin, then we can do Gunjan, and then Pramod, Vijin, all your views, initial views around how this tokenization story is developing in India. Over to you, Nalin.
Yeah, thank you, Geetika, and good afternoon, everyone. Feeling really excited about things. Lot of interesting ideas to talk about. So from Rupay perspective, from NPCI perspective, I think for us tokenization is something that has been there for a good number of years. I think international markets, my peers from Visa and Master will validate that. It's been around for quite a number of years. I think it's evolved a period of time, and now it's kind of reached a place where certain nice, interesting use cases are emerging out of it. The way, I think the way we've approached tokenization has been slightly different. Of course, for us, UPI is a way of tokenizing certain transactions. It gives you a virtual ID, and then you can start doing your transaction using that ID. I think tokenization in its current shape as being discussed is a natural progression for card transactions to move into that regime. Of course, with the new developments where you're now looking at third-party tokenization and third-party applications are getting involved into it. I think there are some good days ahead. A lot of learning still yet, I would say. As an industry, we've moved from MaxType to EMV. It has taken us 4 years. We've still not done 100%. Getting people to move away from physical cards to EMV cards to tokenized card, I think will take some time and a lot of consumer engagement process. But I think it's the right time to start looking at it. I would say, and start looking at some new use cases around it.
Thanks, Nalin. Gunjan, your views?
Thanks, Geetika. Good evening, everyone. When the conversation of tokenization came up, I think it is an interesting one, particularly for us as merchants. Because from a merchant perspective and from a consumer perspective, I truly believe tokens are the future for secured payments. While we are on this thought, it is important to give some context around PCI DSS certification and most importantly around level 1 certified merchants. Now, PCI DSS are globally accepted and adhered norms, and the protocols that are followed by level 1 certified merchants are the same security protocols that are followed by payment aggregators, processors, and issuers globally. What this means is these are rigorous standards to encrypt and protect payments and card data. And these merchants don't really store card data in the PAN format, but they store it in a clear text format. What that means is it devalues the stored card data and reduces the incentive for anyone outside of the system to attack the system for their financial gain. Why is this context important, you ask? And that's because many customers prefer to save their card credentials with merchants for a convenient and a frictionless checkout experience. And data suggests that in the last 3 years alone, this practice of saving card on file has gone up significantly. And in order to secure that card data and thereby payments data, simply moving this card data from one place to the other is not really going to protect the data. What will protect the data is mechanisms like tokenization, which is really deployed to protect the customer card data by adding extra layers of security over the PCI standards. And while PCI DSS level 1 certified merchants can be trusted with card data, and the same cannot be said about other merchants, what tokenization offers is a technology that can help create a sustainable, safe, and a scalable card on file ecosystem. And really, from that point of view, feel that if you're talking about a future of secured payments, tokenization cannot be missed from that conversation.
Yeah, that's a great perspective, Gunjan, especially from the merchant side of it. And I've also actually heard counter views around, do you think tokenization is a double-edged sword where people think they're not actually storing, they're storing a token and they need not be PCI DSS compliant in that case, since they're not actually storing card data, right? So yeah,
Right.
you can
Yes.
delve a little bit on that. Pramod, maybe over to you.
Yeah, I think, both Nalin and Gunjan have called out some interesting views around tokenization, and I would echo both of them. It's important to start somewhere rather than waiting for things to evolve and not start at any moment of time. What I would definitely call out on tokenization is, it's something which is global, it's accepted, it's proven that it is successful. It has reduced fraud. This is something that's white papers and multiple of them published globally, that how it helps reduce fraud in countries where there is no 2FA. Obviously, I'll just make that disclaimer. But in India also, with 2FA already playing a very, very important role in the way India has evolved, there are still some frauds that happen because of consumers being a little careless, some attacks that happen on merchant, and there are different reasons why fraud happens, right? So it can definitely, to a certain extent, address those frauds as well, protect the consumer against card phishing, card being misused, and customers being called to share their OTPs and so forth. So it can address wide variety of cases and prevent fraud. So it's definitely an important step in that direction. And the way tokenization is now being implemented with 2FA, which is very different from the standard 2FA that happened in India, which was a 3DS1 protocol, to the way tokenization is now implementing, its 2FA. I think seen with our implementation is that a standard authentication and authorization blended approval rates are in the range of 78 to 80. With tokenization, we are seeing in excess of 91. So I think it not only helps, protect against fraud, it definitely enhances consumer experience. And then if more number of transactions get processed, that means there is more digital transactions happening in the ecosystem. So I think it addresses not only the merchants' concern, but also addresses consumers' concerns and the PAPGs. Everyone in the ecosystem is actually taken care of, and the transactions are very safe and secure.
Great. Thanks, Pramod. Vijin, initial views?
Hey, hi everyone. This is Vijin. I echo to what Pramod said earlier. See, with with COVID-19, a lot of things have changed around the globe, right? And especially in India too, right? So consumers are embracing digital commerce, more than ever, right? And we've really seen that stride in digital commerce or digital payments, as we call it as, right? So again, there's a greater consumer demand for mobile banking, digital wallets, etc., right? So what it simply means is that from a fraud perspective, the digital fraud is becoming more and more sophisticated, right? Day by day, right? And there are, more the number of digital users. That means you have a proportional number of, digital, fraudsters coming into picture, right? And there's increased fraud risk across the board, right? So so for me, the way I look at tokenization is, in three important aspects, right? So number one is we will have to reduce the exposure of the payment credentials in the wider ecosystem, right? That's one important thing that we need to do, because as consumers, it's easy for fraudsters to impersonate and get our payment credentials, right? Now, is there a way we can reduce that exposure of payment credentials? So that's one thing which we will have to see, right? Number two is, in the event there is an exposure, right? How do you mitigate the impact, right? So we cannot, foolproof. We can't foolproof the system, right? And I agree with Pramod that, is there a 100% possibility that the entire, card ecosystem moves into tokens in the next 5 years? May or may not, right? So basically what we'll have to look at is, in the event of an exposure, how do you mitigate the impact of that exposure, right? And number three is building that, trust across the ecosystem, right? It's not something which, let's say card networks like us can do or a merchant can do, right? I mean, we need that entire ecosystem to be, glued into this whole tokenization story, right? So that there's a better trust in this whole ecosystem, I would say, right? So I would say tokenization, yes, it's an answer to, the concerns that we see in the digital payment ecosystem, but that's not the only aspect that we'll have to consider. We should look at other aspects too, which is like layered on top of tokenization.
Absolutely. Thanks, Vijin. So now now that we've got initial thoughts around how the merchants are looking at it, how maybe UPI is also one form of tokenization, and how PCI, it obviously increases the trust in the entire ecosystem, but there is still a lot more to be done, and the onus is just not on the merchant as well as or the card network, right? It's the entire ecosystem, from issuers to processors to even the customer themselves, right? Understanding the entire flow. So with that, let's kick off maybe to understand how does the entire tokenization experience in India, everything from the uptake to how the process is actually followed. How does it compare to maybe some of the global counterparts? So maybe Pramod and Vijin, if you all can give your views around how it compares to how it's done globally.
Sure. Should I kick it off?
Yeah, Pramod, you can go on.
Go on, Vijay.
I think Pramod, your turn. Go ahead.
No, Vijay, go on. You started, I guess.
Okay, sure. See, I think let's understand what is tokenization, right? I'm sure, as being in the payment industry, for us, it's a day-to-day affair, right? So we all understand tokenization, right? So
yeah.
See, if you step back a bit and understand what is tokenization, it actually simply means that, instead of storing, an actual, payment instrument somewhere, right? We are storing it as, a kind of a surrogate value, right? So that the visibility of that, of that surrogate value is known only to the industry participants, right? And not to a fraudster, who has the ability to, let's say, hack into a system and, fetch that data, right? And tokenization has been used, extensively in the e-commerce space. And I'm sure, Gunjan would agree to me that it has been there for, many years, right? So where, instead of a card number, it gets replaced with a, let's say, a string ABCDE, so that, those merchants don't have to be PCI compliant. Right, so this has been there in the ecosystem, right? However, the global standardization of this tokenization, in fact, started almost, I would say 6 years back, right, where it became a standard under the EMV umbrella, and we call it as EMV tokenization, right? For the last 6 years, we've seen that adoption grow to close to 100 odd countries, right? And it has been embraced by all the large digital players. You name it, and you have all of them embracing tokenization, including large e-commerce merchants as well, right? Wherein it brings in a better trust assurance levels to the wider payment ecosystem, right? Adoption of tokenization in India started, around 2017, I would say, with the launch of, Samsung Pay, right? Where, post which there was, of course, a pause for about 1 to 2 years, where RBI was, really trying to understand more on tokenization, and thanks to their support, that there was a guideline released in early 2019. Post which all of us in the industry, we work towards enhancing our system to adapt to that standard, right? So, and we have now we are actually seeing some of the wallets using tokenization already in the market, and you would have seen some of the press releases in the last couple of months, I would say.
Yep. Pramod?
Yeah. So your specific question on how we in India are seeing this pattern evolve. So as we called out, RBI came out with a regulation early Jan 2019. What they definitely did was put in incremental conditions the way it has to be implemented for all the right reasons. It put in checks and balances as to who can be a token requester, what is the role of the network, what are the roles for banks, a yearly audit mechanism to be put in both for the token requester, for the bank, and for the network. I think all the guidelines and frameworks have come in, which are relatively different from what a typical tokenization implementation would happen in different parts of the world. In addition to customer security around 2FA, which is mandated on tokenization as well. So all those things have now been implemented, and as you would realize, these incremental conditions take some time and effort with the banks, with the token requester, and with the network to build in and roll out. So we've rolled it out in the last few months, and as I said, we're seeing some very, very interesting data. Obviously, on both authentication and authorization PSRs, which are upwards of 90, so talks that is a clear call out that the success rates are obviously ahead of what they were on a typical standard PAN. And obviously, with no fraud reported, we can safely assume that it's safe and secure as it has been called out in different parts of the world. So we would believe that we've implemented a different version from what has been implemented as standard tokenization, which was only across e-com. In India, you also have a scan and pay use case, tap and pay use case, and an in-app use case. So all those incremental conditions have now got built in. And we believe, it will scale up over a period of next 12, 18 months.
Right. Perfect. So you're saying the time is actually right now, where all the groundwork has already been done, and now it's really about it taking off.
Yeah, so all the plumbing has been put in place, which is very, very important, right? In any infrastructure project, you would agree that banks have to make significant effort to putting the plumbing around, merchants have to do it, the ecosystem, payment aggregators and all have to come together. Have we done the job fully? The answer is no, but we believe we are in a good shape from here to take it to the next level.
Yeah. Thanks, Pramod. Thanks, Vijin. So, talking about it taking off from here, right? So, Nalin, do you think some of the use cases that will really help it take off, right? And maybe in some of the other countries, like I think Southeast Asia, Australia, we've seen a lot of implementations around transit with tokenization, right? Do you think these are some of the use cases that India also needs to start building around for it to really, take off in that sense?
Yeah. Important to build certain use cases as we look at this technology. As we look at this and this challenge of security, and then we start looking at other options. From a physical payment, what we call as in-store payments or physical payments, we call it physical payments, not offline, for different reasons. But for physical payments, I think it kind of entered, with Samsung Pay, Vijin spoke about it. With Samsung Pay, it was a lot of physical payments, in-person payments, and eventually, I think the consumers have realized that, or maybe the market is slowly evolving, saying, for me to do something on the phone and tapping my phone, I need, of course, my phone to be a smartphone, and then over and above, I want my phone to be an NFC-enabled phone. And I'm not sure that, as payment industry, we have aligned ourselves with phone manufacturers to ensure that there are low-cost phones available with NFC technology.
Yeah.
So the in-person payments need a little bit of more work in my mind, and then I think more at an industry level, so that you don't have to worry about phones being there. So as far as your question is there on the transit side, I think it has a great use case if you ask me. But it requires a lot of work around working with the phone manufacturers to ensure that this is in the hands of everybody, and it's not specifically on a certain type of phone, because that breaks the experience. I will download an app, suddenly I realize I can't do anything because I don't have NFC. So that's one part. However, the long-term use case that has been, I think, globally is being seen is on the e-com side. I think there's certainly a certain, some value around that. And for in-app payments and stuff like that. But is it like Pramod also pointed out, is it something that replaces? So for example, in a country like India, where we are already doing two-factor, now RBI has gone one step. Ask banks to just take away the e-com payments from all the domestic cards, international, e-com payments, international contactless payments, take away that functionality from the card if it has never been used in the last 6 months or whatever that time period is. And for new cards, it is by default, it is switched off.
Yeah.
I think there's a very, very, very strong view out there in the market if you look at the greater ecosystem. And is it a replacement of the current security challenges in domestic e-com payments? I'm not too sure about that. Maybe yes, it helps some way or the other. It certainly helps when we're looking at single-factor authentication, but in two-factor, I'm not too sure. But to my mind, it's a greater convenience part, because being able to store a token and then sort of fluently complete a transaction helps you, sort of makes your life a little easier. It's like card on file. You may not have to enter a CVV also, and then if you are able to build it, merge it along with the scheme-based authentication, then you've got a great use case out there. So I really think that on the online space we can do some magic. However, there's a word of caution, and then that's what I was sharing with all of you, that while some of the large merchants like Netflix and some of the others may have embraced it and they've adopted it, on the issuing side, it's a whole lot of banks. Some of them are, of course, very active. They would have, in fact, a lot of banks tried tokenization on their own 3-4 years back, but they realized they can't run their own apps and move to third-party apps. But a lot still have to do something about it. And I think before we can make it a market, before we can make it an EMB-led kind of a solution, saying everybody does it. Even RBI is saying you can do it if you want to. It's not saying that you have to do it. I think some good wins need to be called out. I think then it'll become easier for all of us to get this through the market.
Right. Thanks, Nalin. So Gunjan, we spoke about how e-com may really be, the use case to start with, and larger merchants like Netflix have implemented it. But do you think for the Indian consumer, given the demographic, given the other options which are available, and subscription tends to be the most common use case that gets implemented, right, to start with. But do you think for the Indian consumer, it will turn out to be can it compete with some of the other options that are available? Are you seeing that? Gunjan, I think you're on mute.
Yes, that's an interesting question. Thanks, Geetika. And candidly, card tokenization and recurring payments are not conflicting. They're complementary. And I think all the more valuable from an Indian consumer point of view. And the reason why they would look at it more favorably is the benefits of consumer experience, a better consumer experience, along with card security. That's the way I look at adoption of tokenization in the country. And I think Nalin made an excellent point around ecosystem adoption and larger issuance also being participating more aggressively in this. And that's something that we get at later. But when you talk about card tokenization, particularly in India, and I think the fear around card safety, card tokenization becomes that perfect solution, which comes in as an enabler that helps particularly recurring card payments drive higher retention, while making payments secure and more trustworthy. And I think throughout my conversation, I speak about secure and having more trust a lot more, because I think that rides at the heart of online payments, whether it is the merchant being concerned about fraud or the consumer being concerned about their card safety. India as a market has been very slow to adopt some other technologies as well, which foster easy card updation, like account updater, for example. If I look at my data, my expired cards happens to be one of the highest decline reasons for Netflix in India. India also has a very processor-centric card encryption technologies, which are, I think, functioning as ad hoc proxies for tokens. And since this is unique to every payment processor, they become a deterrent to interoperability in the true sense of the word. Tokenization as a technology then comes in to address all of these gaps, while enabling secure card payments and card on file storage. So if I were to give a little more data basis, some of the things that Vijin and Pramod also mentioned, from a merchant point of view, globally, Netflix has been an early adopter of tokens. We don't have it in India because we're not allowed to, and we would love for us to start in India. Since 2017, today we're in around 27 markets where we process tokens. And on the retention side, we've seen churn improved around 17 bips on an annual basis. Even on chargeback rates, we pride ourselves at having one of the best fraud prevention techniques globally. But tokens has helped bring it down further, so much so that our chargeback rates are lower than 2 bips in some of our regions. So I think this goes on to speak about the benefits that tokenization drives, not just for the merchant, but eventually for the customer who sees value in being able to save a card safely with a merchant because a merchant has subscribed to technologies like tokenization.
Yeah. Great point, Gunjan. So I think we're all heading to the point where e-com, recurring payments, these can become the key use cases to drive the adoption going forward. And hopefully, we should start seeing some traction both from the regulator around that area and also the participants in the entire ecosystem, which brings me to my next point, actually. So how do you see the adoption on the entire ecosystem side, Pramod? Everyone from issuers to processors to customers to consumer apps, what's been your experience around adoption? Because generally I think the view is that it's been slow, and we should try and understand why it's been slow, but let's first understand, is it really slow, and what is the general experience around adoption?
Okay, so let's demystify this thing around tokenization. So what's basically happened is what RBI has given us an approval for specific use cases, which says in-app tap and pay and scan and pay. These are capabilities that RBI has approved and said that issuers and banks have to enable this. Right now, there is a general concept of tokenization, which if you see, Gunjan called out that it's not allowed for Netflix, which is called card on file tokenization, which means that whether you come from a web, whether you come from your mobile app, you are able to use tokenization to just use your token and not your card number. Now, globally, networks have developed technology which can do on behalf tokenization and enable that use case, say, tomorrow. So network stands in to do what a typical bank would do to create its capabilities. And if the regulator says in India, hey, tomorrow you're approved for card on file tokenization, can you enable all the Visa banks in India? We would definitely say yes, because we can stand in and actually do the tokenization for the bank till the bank actually gets onto its capability of building that infrastructure and all. So globally we have that, and I'm quite sure Mastercard would have a similar ecosystem. And I guess networks like Rupay already has something like this on UPI, where there is all the address and so on and so forth. Now, what we've done is, what RBI has approved is a more complex use case, in terms of saying what can happen with the participation of third parties, like we announced with Google and so on and so forth. It's an in-app specific use case. There is scan and pay, there is tap and pay, and all that stuff. Now we had to put the hard work of certifying banks for those use cases. We had to do the hard work of implementing what guidelines RBI had put in place to get this implemented, and hence that runway was much longer than what a standard card on file tokenization would have got onto the table. So as we speak, obviously there's a lot of hard work on these specific use cases, but I think we cover a good reasonable number of banks with these specific use cases. And with COF, as I said, we can stand in for a tokenization for majority of the banks. So 2020, 2021 will be an inflex point for the scale of tokenization, as I started with, because not only Visa, but the banks have built those capabilities, and by the ability to stand in for COF or tokenization, I think it'll go to the next level altogether.
Great. Thanks, Pramod. Coming to our next point around how do you think, Nalin, this stacks up against an already overheated mobile payments market where a lot of these use cases are being implemented, right? For you, like you mentioned, UPI itself is a form of tokenization, right? So how do you think this stacks up against some of the already existing use cases which have widespread adoption today? You're on mute, Nalin.
Yeah, sorry about that. If you ask me, I think something what Pramod spoke about, if you look at the credit market, if you look at the credit cards in general, a lot of credit issuers, I think, have embraced. They've embraced this, and they've sort of been very forthcoming in adopting this this solution. And I think if I look at the credit card issuers, certainly their consumers will have a way to now tokenize themselves and experience in-app payments, experience some of these online payments, or scan and pay or tap and pay. When I would say that is something which is still not yet available on credit issues today on UPI. So I think there is space. There is space today, but can it come on UPI? Of course it can. It's just it's a point of regulation. Nothing stops. So there is. But if you ask me, there have always been more than one ways to pay, and I think as an ecosystem we've solved payments more than we've solved the other parts of the story. People have options to pay using wallets. They can pay using credit card, debit card. So many options are still there. And net banking. Imagine net banking is still working today.
I think India is having a problem of plenty currently.
So I'm saying for online payments, you also have net banking. I think commercial plays a role. Yeah. Because which payment mode can be, merchants are going to adopt that, right? If tomorrow a payment mode is going to be more expensive, be it token, card on file on token and all those things, then the commercial part is so important for them to make a choice on what payment mode, which is why net banking is still relevant, because that's, for some of them, it's one of the cheapest payment mode if you look at high value payments today. So I just think that, it will be, it's okay. I mean, it's okay to have one more option out there. Eventually, the mix between what is more beneficial to the consumer, what's more easier for him to do, and for a merchant, more importantly, because there's with the PAPG guideline, there's so many other things that he has to take care of now. Plus, what is more cost effective, I think those modes will evolve. But I think it's not something that it is that it will. Of course, what it will not be, in my mind, it's not something that can groundbreakingly take over something. I don't think that is the point right now. Really, that has to be seen.
Okay. Thanks, Nalin.
Yeah.
So just coming to the fag end of our discussion, Vijin, maybe from your end, if you can just understand, what do you think that India needs to do for it to really take off? Pramod spoke about all the groundwork being done. What is the next phase? Do you think it can really just take off on its own, or there are still some tweaks required? Maybe Vijin, your view, and then Gunjan, you can also follow it up, maybe from the merchant side of it, if there is something that you think really needs to be done.
Sure. So Yes, I agree with the Pramod and Nalin's statement that, we've already done some bit of a plumbing in the India market, and we are getting into the right direction, number one. And agree to Nalin's point that, yes, commercial aspect of it should be taken into account, because, as Gunjan mentioned earlier, there is the benefit that you see in terms of overall approval rates increasing, right? So, of course, there's naturally a benefit coming back to the merchants as well as consumers, and of course that might be at a additional price, right? So which is something which needs to be defined at a market level, right? While we spoke a lot about security, right? So there are a couple of other things which we'll have to look at, right? See, tokenization, if I just step back a bit and look at it, it's basically building a bridge, right? A pipe between the e-commerce merchants, right? Or it could also be, let's say transit authorities, all the way back to the issuing entities, right? It's actually a pipe that is getting built, right? Which provides, better visibility from a consumer point of view. Like, for example, if, for me, my banking app is my most trusted app, right? I'm sure it is the same for a lot of consumers, right? Now, if I have the ability to, log into my banking app, and, I have the ability to push and say that, hey, today I'm going to use my card at XYZ merchant, just by a click of a button, if I can just push my card as a token at those e-commerce merchant, wouldn't it be nice, right? Number one. Number two is, there are a lot of these recurring payments which can happen either on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis, and in certain cases on every year, right? Like insurance payments, right? So is there an opportunity for me as a consumer to, let's say log into my banking app and suspend my token, for example, right? Because I want my token to be active only when I need it, right? Why should I keep it active at a merchant, for example, 365 days a year, right? It doesn't make sense, right? So this is what we call as some, in-app provisioning, right? Or app-to-app provisioning, or, where, it's about, giving that choice to that consumer, which this pipe is able to establish, right? So we're basically building applications on top of the pipe, right? That's number one. Number two is the control, right? So today, let's say I lose my card, naturally, I have to, as a consumer, the banks are going to block my card. And I also have to go to individual websites and kind of delete my card and, re-register my card, right? I'll have to go through a lot of pain. So with tokenization, what we're saying is we are bringing that granularity in terms of the control that a consumer would get, right? So they can go to merchant XYZ and say that, hey, remove my token from these places while my physical card remains active, right? So these are, some of the use cases, like, the provisioning, better control. And, I agree with Gunjan that approval rate is something which haunts every e-commerce merchant, right? And that's an area that, we'll have to focus on. And we have actually seen, good amount of approval rate increase with tokenization, right? Now, I think all this can be, combined. And another big problem, I think, in India is standing instructions on debit, right? Which is not allowed across, most of the debit cards. And primary reason, I understand from a regulatory point of view, it's primarily because what happens if your debit card is lost and, you've inserted your card at a merchant. So there's no control, right? And that is exactly where I was talking about that pipe, right? Which, gives a control for consumers to, call their bank or to log into their banking application and control where their payment, instruments are used, right? So I would say that, when we combine all this as a full story, there's a lot of benefit being, provided both for, the ecosystem partners as well as to the end consumer.
Thanks, Vijin. Gunjan, parting thoughts.
I think from the point of view, or from the point of questioning with regards to what can India do differently in order to make sure that tokenization realizes its full potential, I candidly don't think we need to do anything differently insofar as the implementation goes. Tokenization, like Pramod and Vijin also pointed out, are globally well-designed and tested EMVCo guidelines and standards, and they are meant to be relevant for each of the markets that they get introduced into. They're meant to protect consumer and consumer card data from fraudulent attack and abuse. What we really need to do is for RBI to allow card-on-file tokenization to happen in the country in line with the global EMVCo standards, so that card-on-file tokenization can provide the benefits that it promises to for all the consumers at large. And I think what is also needed is, again, I think Pramod or Vijin, and I think at one point in time, Nalin also made this point, where the key for tokenization success is market education and acceptance on the benefits of tokens. So I think as long as there's concerted support from all relevant stakeholders to make scheme tokens successful, it would really help realize the true potential of tokenization.
Great. Thanks, Gunjan. So let me just quickly summarize, and then we have a few questions, and I think we are already on time. So just quickly, in terms of, I don't think there's any debate around the benefits of tokenization. I think we unanimously agree that there are plenty of benefits on the security side, on the customer benefit side, customer experience side. Recurring payments is a great use case. E-com is a great use case. I think card on file needs to be enabled from a regulatory standpoint, and that will probably help the push that is needed. Um, I think we have some way to go maybe on the commercial side, right? Customer education side, I'm not sure if the entire ecosystem completely understands. It sounds like a very technical term to a lot of people today, but I think it just needs to be simplified a little, both on the customer side as well as acquirer as well as issuer side. We need to start looking at a few more enhancements in terms of the controls that can be established for the customer. Examples being provisioning, approval rates, focus on some of these areas. And I think we can still see some way, but given the Indian ecosystem, there's still going to be competition from other payment modes. So will it really take over the Indian market like it has some of the other payment other countries? Remains to be seen. I say that with a bit of pinch of salt, but I think we are poised perfectly to actually see how it goes from here. At least we shouldn't be saying that it's still in a work in progress. All the groundwork seems to have been done. So now let's see if it can really take over. So just moving on to a few questions. So the first question is, what are the main reasons around the slow adoption of tokenization in the country despite its intrinsic value? I think we spoke about that in different ways, right? One was the use cases essentially that need to be established. The second was the changes that needed to be made by the schemes to enable it for the Indian payment ecosystem, right? So I think these are a couple of things. The third being customer education again. So these three seem to be the main reasons, unless I think anyone else wants to add something.
Yeah, no, I would just add the this on credit moving into debit and other card types as well. I think that's important.
Yeah.
And while there are on behalf services available, but like it happened for EMB was also on behalf, then finally moved to full EMB. Just saying that banks need to be sort of, so if you want volume and scale, I think debit has to come in.
Oh, great. Yeah. Next one being, does the customer have any role or control in the tokenization process? I think Vijin answered that already in terms of if it was implemented in its true sense, there's a lot of visibility that the customer will have and a lot of control that the customer can have in terms of allowing limits, token, the validity, how long they want to make it available on a particular merchant, all of that, right? So that is available. Moving to the next point, what kind of coordination is required between various players in the ecosystem for tokenization to be adopted faster and efficiently? Pramod, do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah. So there is a certification process as defined by the networks. As Vijay called out, it's an EMB spec, so there are some standards that need to be followed by the ecosystem players. It's available in the public domain. Plus, incrementally, there are some conditions that the regulator is called out. So both of them have to be followed for a successful implementation of tokenization for a rollout in the market.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Pramod. And the last question is around how are the RBI regulations working towards protecting customer data? What are some of the new security measures implemented for tokenization? I think Pramod touched on it briefly in terms of the changes that they've had to make in terms of the second factor of authentication. Also, the way 2FA will be implemented for tokenization has been had to be implemented. Also, the use cases around scan and pay, in-app, all of that. Pramod, any more details around what are the changes that RBI has,
So-
expect?
Yeah, so if you see, for example, in the past, and that's what RBI seems to be doing in future also, they've said that the token requesters cannot save the PAN number. So that's something that was explicitly called out in January of 2019 as well. That's
Yeah.
very different from how tokenization has been implemented in different parts of the world. So here, the token requesters cannot save the PAN. So the moment the token gets provisioned, every time you want to generate a token out of your PAN, there is a step up that happens. Once the step up happens, the merchant or the token requester in this case has to delete the PAN, and all he's left is with the token. So that's one incremental call out that the RBI did. Other than that, there are some token level controls that RBI asked for implementation. So you see the card controls which are there, and then there are some token level controls which sit on top of card controls, like stating that the consumer can decide if I want to enable scan and pay on this particular token. Can I do in-app on this token requester or not? So there are incremental conditions that sit on top of card controls, which might be very different actually. So your token settings might be very different from your card settings. So these have actually come into play much earlier than what came in for card. So these are some conditions that have to be met before rollout of tokenization for consumer security.
Perfect. Great. I think we are right on time. Thanks, Pramod. So thank you, everyone. I think we had a perfectly engaging discussion and we balanced it well between going to technical versus going to commercial and keeping it very high level. So thanks, everyone. Great insights. I hope everyone else enjoyed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks,
Hey, thanks,
Geetika.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.